to choose Christ or to choose Barabbas. So let me endeavour in simple words tonight to try and compare the difference, if it's at all possible, between Christ and Barabbas. Let us feel for a moment if they wanted to choose Christ. The majority of the crowd were Pharisees, Sadducees, and you know the old story about the Sadducees. They were a religious group that disbelieved in the resurrection, and that's where there were Sadducees. There were Sadducees, scribes, and they were called hypocrites. But Jesus Christ, friends, had cut across their lives, revealing their hypocrisy and sin in such words as Matthew 23. But woe unto you, scribes, Pharisees, and hypocrites, etc. And later, in verse 27 of that chapter that we read, he called them whited sepulchres, a generation of vipers. But you see, the fact was, for these people, for this crowd to accept Christ would mean that these people following Barabbas, they would have to break with their sin. Christ would make their make-believe religion. He would scrap their old and cherished traditions. They would have to make their ungodly greed and their touching things. It meant living for others instead of living for self, as Jesus had done. It meant placing everything in the holy light of God and letting Him to deal with their sin. So as they realised what the difference Christ would make to their lives, the more they wanted Barabbas. And friends, let me say this with all sincerity. This lowly man, this despised Nazarene, was a challenge to their way of life. And we as Christians, even in 2011, I believe that we are still a challenge to the outside world. Or we need to let the Lord use us so much. Choosing Christ would mean the most drastic alteration and probably considerable restitution. So you see, they had so much, if only they thought of what Christ could do for them, but yet they were interested in following Barabbas. So then, let us think what they would do if they choose Barabbas, shall we? Because Barabbas could do nothing for them. It meant exactly the opposite to what Christ would do. And so, Barabbas, if they choose him, it would be easy going. They could go the same way as a stream. They wouldn't have to fight against it. Barabbas would let them, his people, they would be able to continue in sin and selfishness. They would be able to, in their lawlessness and self-pleasing perdition. Barabbas, he would never spare their conscience. No, no, no. He would never call them whited sepulchres? No, no, no. He would never call them a generation of vipers? No, no, no. This tax gatherer could collect 4 or 10 times more if it was possible for him to get it. And Barabbas would never trouble them in any way. In other words, they could just continue to do exactly what they were doing. There'd be no restrictions. They would just be able to carry on in their sinful way of living. Barabbas would never trouble them in any way. He would never challenge their form of worship or their many making devices in the temple. There need be no discipline, no restraint as far as he was concerned. Adultery was as good as chastity, and greed as good as generosity to him. So these people started, we want Barabbas. Can you imagine when in our own country, when there's a special royal occasion and the royal family come on the balcony and that vast crowd all outside, we want the king, or we want the queen. And so you can imagine this crowd of people enraged because they were planning to put Jesus to death. And all they could say was, we want Barabbas, we want Barabbas. No, Barabbas couldn't do anything for them. But listen, Barabbas could not heal their sick. Barabbas, he would never be able to deliver their demon-possessed. He would not ease their guilty conscience or cleanse their many vile sins. He was totally unable to lift them to a higher moral plane, to nobler purposes or holier heights. He could give no glorious communication with the divine or any real satisfaction. These people, this great crowd that represented all around about, they needed a revolution or a great Christian. They lived on a very low sensual plane. Their lives were far from satisfactory, and Christ alone would give them what they needed. Yet they rejected him and chose Barabbas. They rejected the good for the evil. They rejected the best, not for the second best, but for the worst.